Ukraine Peace Campaign. That group, as well as the Massachusetts Peace Actions Education Fund, are sponsoring tonight's webinar. And the topic tonight, particularly urgent with the war in Ukraine nearly 4 years old and reaching a critical turning point, is Ukraine, negotiate, don't escalate, and risk World War III. Our guest speaker is retired U.S. Air Force intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatowski of the Eisenhower Media Network. I'll add more about her background in a moment. After this introduction and her presentation, there will be a question and answer session with all of you. We ask that you submit your questions either in the chat box or using the hand icon, and we'll take them live. We ask that you limit your question or comments to 45 seconds. We'll let you know when your time is up, so that as many people as possible can have an opportunity to share their question or comment. Our program will end at 8:30 p.m. It will also be recorded and available for future viewing. Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatowski served in the Air Force for over 20 years before retiring in 2003 over her opposition to the government and military's misuse of intelligence to support their policy to attack Iraq. She's a co-founder of the organization Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. She wrote a number of insider essays while serving as a desk officer at the Pentagon and with the National Security Agency, and has been published in LouRockwell.com, The American Conservative, and Salon. She has an MA in government from Harvard, an MS in science management from the University of Alaska, and a PhD in world politics from the Catholic University of America. I also just want to mention that other of our recent webinars included speakers such as former CIA Russia analyst George Beebe, weapons expert Richard Krishnick, Russia expert Professor Richard Sakwa of the University of Kent in the United Kingdom, and journalist Scott Horton, author of the 2025 book Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. You can find the recordings of these webinars and others on the Massachusetts Peace Action website. So thank you for being with me during this introduction, and I'd like to turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatowski. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And the topic is, of course, very important. And I appreciate the introduction because I really don't have a lot to add to that, but I can develop it a little bit if there's personal questions. I mean, I left the Pentagon, retired in 2003. And I was there during 9/11, so I had kind of an interest in all of that activity. And I'm not an intelligence officer. I am a policy analyst, or I was one. But I utilized the intelligence that was produced. And so I saw the real, more objective intelligence. And I also saw what was produced by, in my case, our next door, our co-office, the Office of Special Plans, which was doing a lot of propaganda to talk the American people into supporting the invasion of Iraq. And so having seen honest intelligence and seen cherry-picked bits and pieces that were often highly classified, sent directly to the Washington Post and the New York Times, I mean, it kind of made me think. And I spoke out a little bit about it, which is, why I'm here. And of course, obviously, I'm very interested in government and foreign policy in any case. But thank you for that good introduction. And I have this, I'm going to read my paper. It'll keep me more focused, but there's plenty of room for questions at the end. And it's in 3 parts. The first is setting the stage in Ukraine. Ukrainian independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 hinged on the recollection and dismantlement of 1,700 Soviet-owned and operated nuclear weapons under the auspices of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1994. As a Soviet state, Ukraine had been the third largest nuclear power in the world. The relocation and destruction of these Russian nuclear weapons was associated with guarantees to Ukraine, according to Wikipedia, as follows. And these are the guarantees, part of them. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to transfer these weapons to Russia for dismantlement and became a party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in exchange for economic compensation and assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom to respect Ukrainian independence and sovereignty within its existing borders. Almost 20 years later, Russia, one of the parties to the agreement, invaded Ukraine in 2014. Now, that's from Wikipedia. End quote. I want to take a moment to emphasize the assurance that was agreed to by the US, the UK, and Russia to respect Ukrainian independence and sovereignty within its existing borders. Like the United States, modern Ukraine faced a civil war 60 years after its founding in 2014, with the Crimea's secession and annexation by Russia and the larger land war between the more urbanized Ukrainian West and rural, resource-rich, and ethnically Russian Donbas region. Incidentally, Crimea had been transferred to Ukraine by Khrushchev in 1953 in a move that ensured Khrushchev's rise to chairman of the Communist Party later that year. The Minsk Protocol in late 2014 and the Minsk Agreement in early 2015 between Russia and Ukraine, put together after Russia annexed Crimea, related to the same parts of Ukraine we are talking about today, almost a dozen years later: the culturally and religiously Russian areas in Crimea and the Donbass. The Kiev nationalist leadership, including the recently elevated second most powerful man in Kiev, Rustem Umerov, has long held a vision of the repossession of Crimea and the subjugation of the Donbas region. But back to 1994. Wikipedia, which has evolved as a friendly CIA psyop, admits that 3 countries promised to respect Ukrainian independence and sovereignty in 1994, but states that only Russia violated this promise. The US and the UK history of rabid Russophobia, our neoconservative State Department, and corrupt congressional interference in Ukrainian elections in the years leading up to 2014 are today common knowledge. Vicki Nuland's Yats is Our Man, selection of the anti-Russian Arseniy Yatsenyuk, brought to power by the US in the Maidan coup, precipitated both the Russian annexation of Crimea and the rise of the US allied Volodymyr Zelensky 5 years later, elected in a landslide after years of conflict on a platform of peace for Ukraine. This interference is part and parcel of the US violation of a widely known pledge by several US administrations to the newly independent Russian Federation that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. Yet beginning with Bill Clinton's presidency and continuing unabated since then, NATO sought to expand eastward in war and preparation for war to groom a number of former Soviet states for NATO accession. My point here is not to ridicule Wikipedia's bias and the mainstream narrative on Ukraine, but to explain clearly that the US has been and remains a major violator of its past agreements. It has encouraged and funded NATO expansion and thus nuclear expansion closer and closer to Russia's borders, in spite of the fact that the USSR had been peacefully retrenched into a smaller, non-communist federal republic. Instead of taking the win in 1991, the US and NATO continued the Cold War. Most analysts admit that this tendency is because our foreign policy is derived, designed, and implemented autonomously by the multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial complex. This is the nightmare scenario that Eisenhower warned us of in 1961, and it is the clear and sane observation of Major General Smedley Butler a century ago in his angry pamphlet, War is a Racket. How important is it to end the current war in Ukraine? Ukrainians deserve peace, but not on the terms demanded by Europe and Kiev, mainly because those terms are guarantors of more war, more NATO expansion eastward, and a greater likelihood of a nuclear accident or even a global nuclear war. This overt and agreed upon vision of peaceful neutrality was the foundation of Ukrainian independence in the early 1990s, and it remains the only vision that will support long-term peace. We can talk about the 28-point or the 19-point outlines created by Washington oligarchs, themselves seeking financial advantage and continued influence, including military sales and services, in a smaller but intact and U.S. allied Ukraine. We can talk about European military expansionist goals, seeking leverage over Ukraine for resources, energy flows, weapons, and as a territory to allow for unconstrained NATO training and deployment, as Western Europe no longer supports this for popular and environmental reasons. We can even talk about Polish and German nationalistic interest in Ukraine as a rump state or a remnant state, as a past and maybe future territory variously controlled or occupied by Poland and Germany. Extreme nationalist political ideology, tainted by Nazi symbology and shaped by Nazi values, remains strong in Ukraine. Nearly 4 years of a meat grinder of a war has this ideology and has concentrated this ideology and made it even more desperate. Ukrainian supremacist ideology and contempt for Russia in particular has also been successfully cultivated throughout the West, much of it using tax dollars and pushed by corporate war pigs for fun and profit. This narrative goes back long before 2014 and continues today, despite its negative impact on average Ukrainians, despite the near destruction of Ukraine's future generations and economy. Ukraine has become, like her East European sisters who joined NATO after 1991, a permanent graveyard for a massive number of legacy weapon systems held by Europe and the West, as well as a testing ground for a wide variety of newer and future weapons. Since the onset of war in 2022, Ukraine has been the burial ground for legacy and outdated systems and a testing ground for new systems and tactics, both for the West and to a lesser extent for Russia and her allies. What is far more obvious and evident is that Ukraine has been a victim of U.S. NATO strategies to create fresh Western-controlled markets and new, if artificial, demand for Western weapons. Without U.S. and Western urging for decades, Ukraine would likely have remained neutral and unaligned, a profitable and eventually prosperous trading intersection between East and West. The civil war in the Donbass would not have occurred without U.S. and NATO, especially British interference in Kiev politics and national elections. Autonomous regions within Ukraine, including Crimea, might have had no reason to fight Kiev for autonomy and should have provided no reason for Kiev to bomb and attack those regions as secessionists, but for Western interference and promises of massive amounts of military aid and cash for any challenge to Russia. The West started the war in Ukraine and actively refused at every opportunity to allow Ukraine to end it. And the U.S. NATO rationale was, in my opinion, threefold. First, to create one more proxy war, this time in Ukraine, to weaken Russia, much as the 2019 RAND study entitled Extending Russia, Competing from Advantageous Ground explained. 1A, a subset of the first, to allow for a seamless shift of forward deployed U.S. and NATO war resources from Afghanistan, which ended in 2021, with little to show but a restored opium trade, U.S. embarrassment, and trillions of dollars wasted. The second major reason, in my opinion, as mentioned above, is to allow for the elimination of legacy Euro and U.S. military systems in order to create new markets and incentives to juice the military-industrial sectors on both sides of the Atlantic. And three, a U.S.-led initiative, apparently supported by German politicians and others, to permanently break the flow of Russian energy into Europe and replace that market with far more expensive U.S. energy sales, more tightly binding Europe to a Western strategy to Western energy and Western finances. Increasing the global price of oil generally while reducing it for Russian energy exports through sanctions regimes also served the petrodollar aspect of the Western financial system. While Russia survived and even thrived under these regimes, becoming more integrated with its global partners, the price of oil has been and remains pimped by U.S. wars, as it has for decades, in service to dollar reserve dominance. The Ukraine war has revealed to the world exactly how desperate the U.S. European entity is to remain dominant in a world of increasing multipolar prosperity and economic independence. What we see is the end of empire. We are witnessing the very predictable acts of an empire, not ready to recede or relinquish power in the new world that is pressing upon it. The fact that the neo-colonial racist state of Israel is deeply embedded in this sphere of militarism, war, and control of markets and populations, to the detriment of those markets and populations, is not an accident. It is all part of the same state, and Ukraine is another face of this state at its ever-expanding boundary. Clearly, it is important to end the war in Ukraine, but it is even more important to understand how a civil conflict inside Ukraine became attractive to the US and NATO, and how it was massaged, fueled, and leveraged into usefulness to the Western alliance. It may be even more important to understand why the United States, as a nuclear power and world leader in the machinery and production of war, seeks opportunities to spark battles abroad. It is of critical importance to study what the United States and NATO do and plan to do in the event of predictable failure of these sparks, conflicts, and full-blown NATO proxy wars against Russia or against a near-peer nuclear power like China. Could and will Ukraine or a similar proxy war in the future lead to nuclear Armageddon? When the nuclear armed empires seek a fight, economically or militarily, directly or indirectly, the world should tremble. Tucker Carlson recently interviewed a nuclear scientist named Ivana Hughes. The conversation was a terrifying reminder not only of the impacts and possibilities of a nuclear explosion, accident, or war, but of actual past nuclear close calls, the nature of our collapsing nuclear control and inspection treaties, proliferation and miniaturization of nuclear weapons strategy, and nuclear weapons or material in the hands of both state and non-state actors. Dr. Hughes explains both technical and political facets of nuclear weapons, and she quotes the late Dan Ellsberg, one of our most well-known whistleblowers, from his 2017 book, The Doomsday Machine: Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. Ellsworth wrote, and quote, "Nuclear weapons policies, past and current, are dizzyingly insane and immoral." Reviewers called his book a chronicle of madness, and Ellsberg agreed. Dan Ellsberg and Dr. Hughes, along with billions of people on Earth, share the view that nuclear weapons should be eliminated entirely. The 9 governments in the world with nuclear weapons disagree with the rest of the world, and their actions, in particular the aggressive and provocative actions of several of these nuclear states, are incentivizing non-nuclear states to gain access or seek to gain access to a nuclear weapon. And yet, as we saw in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, agreements can be made to remove nuclear weapon capability, as Russia did, dismantle and destroy them. Past treaties have reduced the numbers of some nuclear weapons and warheads, and the Non-Proliferation Treaty has been somewhat effective, although at least one U.S. allied nuclear country refuses to even participate in that mild agreement. In the case of South Africa, the same country, Israel, in 1975, offered to sell nuclear weapons in 3 sizes to the apartheid regime in South Africa. Botha did not pursue this offer for long, mainly due to cost, and later South Africa developed their own nuclear weapons capability with Israeli assistance. However, when apartheid ended, this nuclear program was safely abandoned. More recently, this past summer, we recall that after the Israeli and American attacks on Iran in the so-called 12-day war, Pakistan effectively made public the concept that Iran would not need to develop its own nuclear weapons, as Pakistan would serve as their nuclear proxy. Nuclear policy and war strategies continue to evolve, both for state and non-state actors. The sheer numbers of nuclear weapons, presumably poised and assigned targets around the world, is literal insanity, and yet we find the West uninterested in restraint or treaties that provide for transparency and inspection. And we also find that, as it might be expected, nuclear-capable militaries have written and rarely debated strategies for the conduct of nuclear wars, specifically survivable and quote-unquote winnable nuclear exchanges. I refer again to the Rand Corporation for examples of this on the US and Western side, but no doubt this kind of strategizing the unthinkable is part and parcel for all of the 9 nuclear-capable nations. Israel, for example, has in place a well-known strategy called the Samson option, whereby pre-positioned nuclear weapons in the land of enemy and ally alike will be detonated if Israel is existentially threatened. Because the definition of existential threats and existential risks are largely determined by sociopathic, incompetent, and/or compromised politicians in a time of the most dire and urgent stress, this kind of dead man's switch for nuclear detonation should be of grave concern. I use the example of Israel here, in part because it is notorious, and in part because it may not be as rare and unusual as is currently portrayed in the media. Why couldn't or wouldn't any country with nuclear weapons see fit to place them in a location where a detonation of a nuclear weapon could initiate a chain reaction somewhere other than in their own country that would cause a global financial reset, the elimination of enemies or competitors, or even just to set off a massive conventional global war that would justify state totalitarianism and state barbarism exponentially worse than that of the 20th century? The Samson option, like the old idea of mutually assured destruction, elegantly serves as leverage prior to its execution, but it also brings nuclear game theory to a whole new level. Many politicians and strategists today believe that a nuclear conflict could be initiated, then contained, constrained, and even stopped before a planetary catastrophe. In other words, many politicians and their advisors believe a nuclear war can be won. What does this have to do with the proxy war in Ukraine? Anyone who has been following the back and forth of diplomatic and political language between Trump and Putin, accompanied by self-righteous squeals of the NATO hyenas, and even the poetically vicious commentary by former Russian President Medvedev over the course of this war, has a good understanding that nuclear threats of unstoppable intercontinental Oreshnik missiles or secret nuclear submarines lurking just off everyone's shorelines are real. One wrong step, one mistaken judgment, one accident, or one false flag conducted by either state or non-state actors could be catastrophic or even world-ending. It is important to remember, of the many nuclear accidents that have occurred since the 1950s, the purposeful detonation of a nuclear weapon at an enemy has thus far been prevented by the acts and judgments of human beings, most of whom were not politicians nor sitting at the top of the decision pyramid. In other words, moral and based human actors prevented the destruction of the planet, often in opposition of what their political leadership had ordered or demanded. The Cuban Missile Crisis, as resolved by JFK and Khrushchev directly in 1963, was a triumph of morality and a legitimate human fear of a new kind of hell on earth, superseding the advice of the ambitious, the arrogant, and the stupid on both sides. Curiously, we may have been blessed by the machinations regarding Crimea. Today, such a tinderbox also provided JFK the right partner in 1963 to prevent imminent nuclear war. We are ruled today by the ambitious, the arrogant, and the stupid, most obviously in the West, and there are many sides intervening and interfering, many facets of nuclear capability, including small nuclear weapons, dirty bombs, neutron bombs, far exceeding the variety the Israelis offered to South Africa in 1975 with bombs in 3 sizes. The evolution of nuclear weapons is leading the nuclear-armed world to contemplate and suggest their use, to threaten their use against an enemy, to grossly and reflexively describe the nature of global competition as a military battleground where nuclear weapons are part of the arsenal. Any place on Earth where nuclear powers confront each other, there is a risk of miscommunication, accident, and more than one immoral and desperate politician. When the confrontation is taking place far from one or both homelands, the risk perception is no longer mirrored, but unbalanced. Thus, the West is fine with risking nuclear conflict in Eastern Europe and fighting to the last Ukrainian. Thus, the United States recently altered its no first strike policy, followed naturally by Russia, as mutually assured destruction, or MAD, is replaced by a more dangerous dead man switch variant, and a new kind of planning for the survival of a nuclear exchange, one that includes something that looks like winning, but only but only to the ambitious, the arrogant, and the stupid. But with other proxy wars in Ukraine, we have seen only superficial attempts by the Trump administration to end this war. Because as its predecessor enables, authorizes, funds, because the Trump administration, much as its predecessor administration, enables, authorizes, funds, and cheers it. The 28-point plan, a weak set of concepts to begin with, suffers modification after modification as it travels from ally to enemy to the host of the proxy war and the NATO beneficiaries and supporters of the total sacrifice of Ukraine, and then back to the Janus-like peacemaker/war enabler in Washington. The war game has many players. The risk assessment is supremely complicated and variable. The cost of peace and war always financialized, never humanized. For the US-NATO-Russia war in Ukraine, we have at least four main players: a multi-pack of politically precarious and bankrupt European prime ministers and presidents, a poorly advised and ill-tempered American president in his final term, a slow-to-anger Russian president pushed to anger and the recognition of an existential threat from the West, and the crumbling Ukrainian house of cards, inhabited by an enraged ideological cadre unwilling to accept the irreversible losses inflicted upon it by enemy and ally alike. For clarity, I have left out the elite oligarchs at play here and the complex machinations of the military-industrial complexes that each have their own interests that may or may not align with those of the political leaders. For the sake of time, I have also left out the list of state and non-state actors that could seek to exploit this European battlefield by extending or expanding the war, and this could be done through the use of a creatively or clumsily designed nuclear event. No doubt the intense, opportunistic, and terroristic bombardment of the Zaporizhia nuclear facility by the Ukrainian military in the first several years of this war, with US and NATO support, lend credence to this suggestion. In conclusion, I am one of many dissenters and defense whistleblowers. I have a well-earned lack of faith in any state or any state's political leadership, and I have witnessed personally the ineptness of both the US and NATO military conduct and decision-making. I have noticed that most Western militaries and their politicians do not lead from the front, but rather huddle with their favorite soothsayers safely in the rear, relying on ones and zeros, dollars and cents, to inform them instead of history, reality, ethics, and their own citizens' fervent desire for peace now and peace for their children and grandchildren. The war in Ukraine should never have started, and it did so because of the political games engaged in by Ukrainian oligarchs, American oligarchs, and European oligarchs, both elected and unelected. The gamble was poorly thought out, and when it went south, the gamblers doubled down, collapsing the Ukrainian army, halving the population of Ukraine in 4 years via secession, military losses, emigration, and the grave. The criminal war in Ukraine should be concluded. I recently discovered that the 2014 Maidan Revolution, as it is referred to by many Ukrainian nationalists, is seen as the revolution of dignity. It surprised me because I understood the Euromaidan from the point of view of Vicki Nuland and John McCain as a successful example of a CIA-backed color revolution, a political coup directed live from Washington, one of several the U.S. government has attempted on Russia's western border. Today, in the aftermath of a $100 million corruption scandal that has implicated Zelensky's sponsors and his chief peace negotiator, we hear Zelensky repeatedly using the word dignity in his public statements, this time in terms of a peace with dignity for Ukraine. If there can be dignity, the U.S. and NATO are incapable of affording it. Nonetheless, if words like dignity help us get there, they should be welcomed. The fundamental problem is that our ability to kill each other and destroy our world, at least the ability of 9 nations on the planet to do this using their expansive menu of nuclear weapons, has advanced, while the morality and discipline of our political leadership has contracted or collapsed. Our leaders have become incapable of learning and perceive their political survival as more important than humanity's survival. Any conflict between nuclear powers risks global disaster. But creating unjust wars, creating enraged and desperate losers of those wars, makes finding any peace more complex more daunting and less satisfactory. It also increases the opportunity for state and non-state gaming of a nuclear detonation, a nuclear gamble, a nuclear accident in an immoral attempt to run the table, shift momentum, or create a new balance of power. I didn't talk about the details of how war might be concluded in Ukraine or how we can truly slow the rush of the doomsday clock to midnight, and we can talk about that in the questions. But I hope I have made clear the depth and complexity of this debate so that as Americans, we might better understand that our own power, exercised at home in our own society, culture, and government, is both courageous and time well spent. And that concludes my formal presentation, and we can talk.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski. Very much appreciated that analysis. And before we go into the Q&A, just want to remind everybody, and I think what we'll do, we'll take a question live with a yellow hand, the icon from you, and then go to the chat. Where's Mary Ellen? Well, Mary Ellen, if you could, as we alternate, do a chat question, and then we'll come back with a live question. And I also want to say, I'm really glad that Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski's voice held up for her presentation, because I just happened to catch her doing a 45-minute show on a show that I watch sometimes called the Rachel Blevins Show. That was yesterday. So she's doing back to back, and your voice didn't crack once.
Oh, well, that's good.
Well done. So thank you all for being here again. And let me go to gallery view and find the first question or comment with a 45-second limit. Where's a hand?
Well, we have two hands. We have Jeff Barktle and someone I don't want to mispronounce your name, Moji Aja, I believe, and a couple more. So hands are going up.
Okay, let's start with I can't see it right now. Maybe it's on another Marcia, the woman Moshe.
Moji. Okay.
Moji. And then we'll
Hold
go
on
to
a
Jeffrey.
second. I'm going to ask to unmute. There we go.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, good. Hi, and thank you so much, Karen. And I'd like to invite you to a bilingual, binational town hall organized by the peace-seeking Iranian veterans, of which I'm a co-founder. And I'll put some information in the chat, and if you could
Okay.
we need voices like yours, especially in Iran. And I want to say 3 days ago, there was on Clubhouse application, I heard a gentleman from inside Iran who claims to be a Muslim. And he said that we are so looking forward to the Armageddon war because we want Imam Mahdi to come and save the world. Therefore, and I was horrified to hear that. Therefore, he thanked Putin and Netanyahu for the genocide, because it shows that the world needs to come to an end. We need to have an Armageddon war. So I am an Iranian American. I'm so afraid of what the ideological forces behind this. So
Thank you, Mr.
so please comment.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
my name is spelled Moji, short for Mujtaba.
Thank you.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, my comment is, it's interesting that in Iran they have this sector of people that believe this way, that they welcome death, destruction, Armageddon in the name of religion, because certainly in this country we see a great number of Christian Zionists that espouse, I mean, they're not Muslim, but they espouse very much a similar message and I think for them it's some interpretation of the book of Revelations, and they've interpreted it and mixed it with politics, which of course I think that's pretty arrogant to think that God works. I don't think God needs to work directly through politicians for everything that he does. And it's a shame that we have sectors of this that they find that message attractive. And I'm sure, I think behind it is, why would people be susceptible? That's almost a suicidal type of a, group suicide. It's a kind of insanity in a way. But why do people feel that way? Because I think they feel they have no other power and they want to wipe the slate clean and come out on the other side, yet or not. They don't care. It's a sense of powerlessness. And I think that's where we have to fix that. People have got to somehow, and we don't feel that way. Even in America, people feel completely powerless. I mean, look at our government. The people in our country do not agree. I don't care, MAGA, not MAGA. They do not agree with what our government does, but they feel, well, they say, well, we voted. They told us they were going to make peace. We elected them, and immediately they launch war. And so we've got to somehow help people and help ourselves to feel powerful. That's part of it. The other part of it is, of course, these wars are horrific. The genocide in Gaza, what they've done to Ukrainians. I mean, I wouldn't call it a genocide in Ukraine, but Ukraine's population is really about half of what it was 10 years ago. And those people aren't coming back. They're not like sitting in Europe just waiting for peace to break out so they can go back to Ukraine. They're not going back. And that country's been broken, and it's been broken because two other big countries, particularly the United States and with the help of Europe, wanted to break it. So that can't be allowed, but it is. It's what we deal with. So it's very frustrating. I share the frustration, but I worry about this Armageddon type religious mentality. It is very concerning.
Thanks for that response. Let's go to a chat box question and then back to the live, and that's Jeffrey Barkdahl. Chat box, Mary Ellen?
You want me to screen? Let's see. Here's a clear one from Ann Wilcox. Could you comment on the current situation in the Caribbean with Navy or Special Forces blowing up boats without confirming who the victims are?
Yeah, well, that's illegal. They're doing it. They're lying about doing it. It is a huge problem for the Constitution because, those really are the kinds of illegal orders that I think those various senators were talking, or the congressmen who called for all of us who take an oath to obey legal orders. We are not to obey illegal orders. And the law, the root of that law is the Constitution. The Constitution is pretty clear. The law is clear. You don't, when you have people, particularly at sea, the law of the sea, the Navy guys are doing this, but the Navy also knows what they're supposed to be doing, and they're being commanded or expected to do the opposite. It's very corrupting. It's illegal. I'll tell you this. I was on Judge Knapp. I'm on Judge Knapp on Tuesdays, and today he was talking about that a little bit. And one of the as he played a report of where apparently our military is shooting people who they've already shot the boat, and there's people hanging on to debris or something that hasn't sunk yet, and they got shot also. They're being shot. And the first thing that came to my mind, of course, was the 1960 June of 1967, where the USS Liberty was attacked. And I don't know if you've ever heard about. I'm sure you've heard about it, but if you've ever listened to one of the guys, any of the guys that survived, and talk about it, Phil Torney is one. He's done a number of interviews. He describes what happened, and it was a 4-hour attack where most of people were in the water. There were some still on the ship. Many were in the water, covered in oil. Some were injured, and they thought the Israelis in the boats were coming to help them, but they came to strafe them, and they strafed them, and there were a number of, obviously survivors, and 138, I think, killed. Now, Israel did that because Israel does not have a constitution or a morality that is anything like most Americans are used to. So they don't really, I don't think you can say, well, why are they so immoral? Well, they don't share an ethic that we share. So we're already on two different planets when it comes to that. However, our military, and this is something the judge pointed out too, and it's unfortunately, and it's sad, it's dangerous, and it needs to be reversed, but our military is adopting Israeli methods of dealing with people, that's people in the street, people that you might want to take prisoner, people that you have shot their boat up and now it's your Red Cross duty, it's your international moral duty to rescue them, take them somewhere, give them a fair hearing, whatever. We know what the right thing to do is as Americans. Israel doesn't do that, and we are adopting it as basically without modification Israeli tactics. And I'm digressing just a little bit here, but the ICE raids that have been a big topic of conversation. I have not followed it closely, but I know that there's a huge amount of anger, and some of the tactics are, I mean, people wearing masks, ICE officers wearing masks. I mean, seriously, this is alien. And yet, if you look at what's being criticized with many of the ICE raids, it is this militarization, this war footing that the cops, federal officers that aren't military are all adopting. And that is right out of the Israeli playbook. That's how it works there. And I'm not here to tell Israel how to run its place. They obviously need to stop killing innocent people and destroying the environment and ruining, trying to eliminate Palestinians. I get that that's wrong, but inside of their country, I don't care if they have militarized cops, that's their problem. But we are copying that. We are copying it in our military, we're copying it in our law enforcement. And so what is happening is we're ruining and degrading our own standards. And that's what makes America a place that people want to live in. And it's what makes us powerful. Even if we didn't have a military, we would be powerful because of the ethical choices we make and what we aspire to be. Not maybe what we are, but what we aspire to be. And we do not aspire to militarize our cops, and we do not aspire to shoot people in the water in order to clean up the mess or to eliminate witnesses or to keep our senior officers from going to trials. But that's what we're doing. That has to stop, and it's insidious. It's unfortunate. I mean, the nuclear war goes off, or you see a genocide. That's something you can work with. Copying another country's inhumane practices, illegal practices, and acting like that's okay and not questioning it, that is an insidious rape of our country. Anyway, I'm upset about that. I'm sorry. I'll shut up.
Hey, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski. We welcome your digressions. These issues
Okay.
are all connected, all connected. I just want to say before we go to the next person, and that will be Jeffrey Barkdall, Mary Ellen. Before we do that, Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski was mentioning Judge Knapp. If people don't know about it, it's Andrew Napolitano, Judging Freedom. He's a retired judge. It's an excellent program, and that's the reference that she was giving if you want to look for her interview with him a week ago. Was it you that were on the show or somebody else? I couldn't remember.
I go on every Tuesday, so
Oh.
I talked to him actually today it's just a short little thing, but and I always learn a lot because he's talking to all the great peace voices, and
She's a regular guest. And I also just want to highlight, because she brought up the USS Liberty. That is an example. I don't think I was even aware of it as a longtime advocate for peace and justice in this country. What happened? 138 Americans being killed and attacked by the Israeli military. In what year was it? I believe 1967.
67. It was midway
67.
through or early on in the first half of the week of the 6-day war, and it was the ship that was the USS Liberty was an NSA listening ship. It was a spy ship, so to speak. So it had some weapons on it, but not much. Mainly, it was a listening ship, and it was in international waters in the Med, and it was basically sitting there, kind of collecting information because of this the details of the war, and there's theories as to why. It's a terrible event, first off, because our own government, LBJ, and the John McCain's father, actually, who was a 4-star admiral, covered this up very quietly, and they threatened the men on that ship were threatened to not talk about it for years. And even Phil Turney, I was able to hear him a couple years ago tell that story, but he, because he was one of the survivors, he was like 19 at the time. He had been told also, and he did not speak of it because the Navy, the admiral in charge of the Navy, said, you will not speak of this or you're going to go to prison. And so they couldn't speak of it. But later, after he was about in his 40s or 50s, he began to, talk more about it. But yeah, this was a put into the memory hole of American history. But Israel wanted, I think, for the attack to be blamed on Egypt so that the U.S. would be a party to the war. And where have we heard this before? That where Israel wants to do something so that now the U.S. is a party to an Israeli war that is of interest to Israel, but then they suck in the United States.
Well, thank you.
Whole nother
Let's come back to Ukraine, but do look that up. That is part of the untold truth of American history. The USS Liberty, Phil Tierney. Yeah, look that up. It'll blow your mind. Now let's go to the next question by Jeffrey Bartdell. 45 seconds, please.
I want to comment on all three. One, is Trump's Ukraine plan a path to World War III? Two, how do we prevent ourselves from going into a nuclear Armageddon? And three, what can we do to end this crisis in Ukraine once and for all?
Okay.
Comment on all three.
Okay, well, the first one, I think Trump, I don't think he's really that, like, maybe the right guy in a lot of ways, but he does want peace. Well, he doesn't, he wants to have leverage over Ukraine, but he doesn't want to pay anymore for that. He wants that, and he also wants to take credit for that war ending. And he has actually, he talked about this when he ran. He met, they had the meeting in Alaska and even in the spring, but he goes back and forth. It's very unpredictable how he really feels. It's hard to say, but I think his intentions are to, unfortunately, like I said, one of the reasons we go into one proxy war is because another one is winding down. I think Trump sees Venezuela as where he wants to focus, and so he doesn't want to focus on Ukraine anymore. Also, Trump is the kind of guy, well, you know this, but he likes to pick winners and losers. He feels that he's not going to put good money after bad in his mind. I'm not saying he doesn't do that, but in his mind, he's like, okay, that's a loss. Let's cut it. And I think that's how he sees it. So will that lead to World War III? Trump is so uncareful with what he does. And I don't know anything about Witkoff's actual capabilities. I know Marco Rubio is incompetent to do anything, to be trusted even to resolve this. It's possible that the Army, the Army commander, the head of the chief of staff of the Army, not the chief of staff, the top military general of the Army, took the place of the older general that Trump had assigned to work Ukraine. That guy wants to end the war, and that guy has the intelligence that says, that is reporting what Russia has been saying, what a lot of people not listening to mainstream media know, and that is that the Ukrainian military has been beaten badly. It's not in good shape. The government's not in good shape. The economy, it's all over. And I think these part of the peace negotiation is actually part of it is the publication of this corruption scandal. You think we didn't know about corruption in Ukraine? We made money off corruption in Ukraine for 25 years, okay? That's a business area for Washington. That's not something they're surprised about. But why would this come out suddenly and cause the couple of these oligarchs to have to leave the country? Two of them went to Israel. The other guy, his main advisor, Umarov replaced him. This guy said he was going to the so-called front. He was going to go to the front. That's unlikely that he's going to the front. But in any case, this is the way Trump is forcing peace. He's not making peace like solving the root problems. He is tactically kind of removing the political barriers to peace. And that's one way to do it, but it's not a way to make lasting peace. I don't think Trump, to answer your question number one, no, not nuclear war for that. I don't think so. Now, the second and third question, you have to remind me. I can't do three questions in a row. What's the second and third? Can you remind me, Jeff? Oh, he's muted. Okay.
I'm with you. I can't remember either.
Yeah. Well, how it could be done. I
The
remember number three.
how
Number three was how would you do it? Well,
no, number 3 was what could we do to end the crisis in Ukraine once and for all, this whole
yeah.
explosion.
Wait,
Number two was what can we do to prevent a nuclear war?
to prevent a nuclear war, we as a people in this country, because we're one of the people that would set one off, or we are very powerful to influence other people regarding nukes, is we have to abide by the law, number one, ensure our politicians are doing it, and we have to be activated to do that. If you look at where nuclear weapons have really been, what the people have had an impact on their government's nuclear policy, it is when they get out in the street, when they boycott, when they march, when they get involved. And we're not doing that in this country, and it's very difficult to do anything like that in this country. So we don't have the kind of we're a very large country with people very spread out. We have a complex system, and most people don't have the time or energy to get out there and resist it. So it's an education factor. That's for number two. For how you would fix Ukraine for the long term is, I mean, there are some good points in the 28 points, or it's been whittled down. But the fundamental thing that has to happen is Ukraine must be unaligned. And it would be nice if a lot of countries were unaligned in Europe. NATO should be eliminated, okay? And if you really want to have peace, the Warsaw Pact is gone. We don't need NATO. There's nothing to defend against, number one. But number two, they're not defending against anything anyway. They are fomenting conflict. So, and they're also sucking a lot of resources out of Europe, which can't really afford them. And of course, we're doing the same. So NATO needs to go. But for Ukraine, in a short, how you would resolve Ukraine, the premise would be, what is the vision? An independent country that's not threatened. Because, nobody's trying to say, oh, I want to go into Switzerland. We're going to fight Switzerland. I'm going to take the East, you take the West, somebody else takes the North. We're going to take Switzerland out. No, because Switzerland is unaligned. They trade with everyone. They don't cause any problems. Finland was very much like this until it joined NATO. And now Finland has issues because now, we can't do that with Finland because they're now part of NATO. So align yourself with people and organizations that want war, that thrive on conflict. Wrong answer. So Ukraine needs to give that up. And I mentioned it in my talk. We had promised NATO would not extend, would not grow, and we lied. So we are not a good person to be settling this peace. We are liars in this country. Our politicians are liars. We cannot be trusted. But Ukraine itself, and this would not happen with Zelensky and some of the same people that are so connected to this conflict, and also American puppets. But Ukrainians themselves need to decide. And I think Ukrainians, after seeing what has been done to their country by us, by NATO, because we used them, okay, and also by Russia, who responded to that, they would probably choose independence, non-aligned. Do they want security guarantees? Well, Russia can provide security guarantees, and everybody can provide security guarantees. It's like, leave them alone. There should be trading with everyone. They're in a wonderful location to conduct trade with East, West. They have great potential, but we have to let the people decide. And if they say that, and I don't think they would say this now, but assume that the people in Ukraine said, you know what, we're going to decide and we're going to beef up our war because we've got 5 guys left that still have 2 hands and 2 feet. So we're going to throw them out there and let them fight. Well, that's pretty dumb. And you have to trust that people won't be that dumb. But yeah, it has to be a non-aligned country. It should have, it should be responsible for its own defense. This idea like, I want somebody to help me. You know what? As soon as you give your security to another country, that's just like having a big debt. Well, as soon as you get a paycheck, somebody wants a cut of it. So you can't do that. They have to be an independent country. They prided themselves. When Ukraine was granted independence, they were so proud of it. And guess what? All the other countries said, yeah, we can make money in Ukraine. We can take advantage of all the corruption that's in Ukraine. We can conduct deals. And then when we want to, we can shift their government to a government that we like. That's how we've behaved with them. So maybe the answer is leave Ukraine alone and we start behaving like citizens of the world.
Thank you for that comprehensive response to the question.
I'll be shorter next time. I'll keep it short.
Let's go to another question in the chat. Mary Ellen, is there one?
Yes. Interesting one. Mary Sifferlin asks, how can we get Russia to stop bombing apartment buildings and other civilian targets constantly all over Ukraine?
Well, yeah, end the war. That's one thing. We can end the war. They won't be doing that when the war is ended because I don't know. I mean, obviously, a lot of people don't trust Russia, but the special military operation that they announced and then implemented in the spring of 2022, it was constrained in its mission. And see, for Americans, we go into wars with no plan, and it's open-ended, and we decide to do different things halfway through. And this very much frustrates the military, and it always, again, makes sure that we lose every time we spend our time at these wars. But so Americans in the West have not seen political leaders use war and use their military in a objective, plan-oriented way. Like, we're trying to accomplish this, and then when that's done, we're ending it. Well, that's how Putin had portrayed the SMO 3.5 years ago. But weirdly enough, he's actually held to that. So I think you can say if the war ends, I would take Putin. I don't think he's going to want to do anything else. Okay, this has also been very costly for them. Now, the other thing I want to say about it is, how do you keep people from shooting up buildings, either accidentally or on purpose? The laws of war, if they can be abided by, which they're not, okay, nobody abides by them, but if they were, that would prevent it. The other thing is, so we're all Western, right? For the most part, we are watching Western TV. We are reading Western and U.S. newspapers, and we are hearing a story that supports what our government wants us to hear. And our government supports demonizing Russia and glorifying Ukraine as a patriotic resistance, moral army. That's not the case. So Russia is not targeting every night apartment buildings. They are not, this is not part of Russia's war strategy. If you want to see ugliness, then we go to the meat grinder at the front. That's ugly, and Russia is doing terrible, ugly things there. But it isn't. It's not an every night thing. So I think context is important, and I think this is also something that doesn't serve our own politicians, because they see the same stuff we do, and they are fed the same intelligence slop that we are fed. And so then we don't have reality, and we're not tuned into what reality is. Because I've also seen, and we could see it in any number of ways, urban apartment areas in Russian cities that are being attacked with drones. Not just drones from Ukraine, because that's where they're being launched from, but drones that are being guided through guidance systems and our radar systems and our intelligence targeting systems of the United States and NATO, assisting them with the targeting of Russian cities. And there's plenty of apartments in Russian cities that have been hit by drones. Neither one of those things are good. But I would caution to think that that's how Russia's fighting this war, because actually how Russia's fighting this war is far worse than that. Okay, it's not pot-shotting apartment buildings. It is decimating the young men and some of the older men of Ukraine on the battlefield. And that's a crime also, to me. I mean, whether it's a war, but it's extremely costly to any hope that Ukraine will have to recover from this war and to rebuild itself, because they don't have the people to do it.
Thank you. Let's move on. Donald Smith. Yeah, you're next.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious. You're one of the most forthright persons to say that the U.S. is largely responsible for this war. I mean, a lot of people hedge that and say, well, both sides are at fault. I tend to agree with you, but is there any hope of getting mainstream people to understand the extent of U.S. provocations, both in the U.S. and in EU? I'm really surprised that EU people haven't, the governments there have fallen for this, because we're really screwing the EU. So comment on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Americans, we don't really care about history. We're always about the now and the future. So I don't think most Americans are ever going to get that we caused this. But there is a sense that we do see it. Americans' view is that we are meddling. Okay. I think to talk about Victoria Nuland handing out cookies, and cheering the Euromaidan, in 2014. No, that's too complicated. But Americans do have an opposition to inane meddling, and they do see our government doing that. And I think that's why every president, whether it was Clinton, if you remember George W. Bush's presidency, he ran on a non-intervention platform. Obama ran on a peace platform. Who came after Obama? Oh, Trump. Trump ran on a non-intervention, bring troops home. Biden, I don't remember what he really ran on, but he wasn't overly, he just continued everybody's stuff. And then Trump came, what did he run on MAGA with the MAGA this last time? We could not hear it enough. Put America first, bring troops home, stop spending money overseas, spend it on our infrastructure, our healthcare, our education, our everything here at home. That's what he was going to do. Of course, he doesn't care about that. He does the war. So Americans themselves do understand meddling causes problem, and American government meddling has created a lot of problems. They do get that. And that's a good thing. So we can build on that. That I think this is a good, easily understandable thing. I think Americans underestimate the power of our CIA. They think it's like, oh, the CIA keeps us safe. No. It needs to be, like Kennedy wanted to do, broken into 1,000 pieces and burned, in my view, gotten rid of. But so it's hard to really. Americans don't know what they get with their government. They don't know. They don't see. We can't even look at the CIA budget. So a lot of Americans innocently think we're not doing bad things, because how could we be doing bad things? Well, we are. I don't know how you fix that. But I will say too that the media is very shaped by government. And I believe this corruption scandal, this $100 million corruption scandal, there's no way in the world that was something we didn't know about. I think it's being fed to the media. Oh, it's time now. We're going to run Zelensky out. There are people on the internet right now, on X, people that know something. In fact, Colonel McGregor, are you familiar with Colonel McGregor, Douglas McGregor? He's a really good guy, and he has tons of media type stuff. He had a thing where yesterday he said the plan is Zelensky will go to Israel. He will be safe passaged out of country. That will be part of the peace plan, which makes sense, because if he stays in Kiev and he does peace, he'll get killed. But the very fact that, and he said, and Douglas McGregor said, well, one of my sources in Eastern Europe told me this. I don't know if it's true, but it makes sense. And why can we say this now? Why has the Overton window moved this far? Because the government told the media, oh, that corruption thing? Oh my goodness, it's real. And look who's involved in it. All of Zelensky's right-hand men, and probably Zelensky himself. 2 of his right-hand men went to Israel. The other one went to the front. We're still looking. Next thing you know, Zelensky's out of there. Peace breaks out. The question is, who did we choose? Because I don't think we've changed our methodology. Who did we choose to run Ukraine? Not a good answer. The Ukrainians have to choose their leaders.
Thank you for all that. And before we go to the next live question, I just want to mention, because you mentioned Professor Ivana Hughes speaking on the Tucker Carlson show. I'm happy to say that she will be a guest in February 12th to be exact, right here. We heard about her. She's a professor at Columbia Chemistry, but she's also the director of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. And I've heard her speak on a couple of programs, and she is great. I'm not going to use that word.
Dynamite.
Yeah, right. There was even that scary movie, which I haven't seen yet, The House of Dynamite. Anyway, she's February. And January, our monthly webinar is another another person at the Eisenhower Media Network, just like Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski. His name is Matthew Ho, Captain Matthew Ho, an Iraq War veteran, disabled veteran, and he is very outspoken about the Ukraine war and NATO and many of the similar themes that Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski. So if you, well, anybody who's here and not a member of Massachusetts Peace Action, obviously, if you'd like to become a member and be on the newsletter and all that, just go to the website, Massachusetts Peace Action, and sign up. Otherwise, once a month, go there and look at who our next webinar speakers are going to be, like I just mentioned. So with that, let's move on. I see a hand, Paul Shannon, who's still on mute, Mary Ellen.
I'm off now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I guess my concern in terms of the nuclear angle in Ukraine is it just seems that European countries, their leaders, including the opposition leaders, are determined to prevent Ukraine from being defeated militarily by Russia. That they apparently will do anything to avoid that. They've signed all kinds of deals, of course. They're talking about sending their troops. NATO is talking now about attacks on Russia, cyber attacks and things like that. It doesn't seem that there is any limit to what they will do to prevent the inevitable. Like you said, the Ukrainian army has taken unbelievable casualties, far, far more than the Russian army. And a whole generation has been wiped out in Ukraine. And yet these people just keep on coming and keep on insisting that Russia must be defeated. And there just doesn't seem to be any limit that I can see.
Well, the
what
limit
they are willing to do.
Well, they're not willing to do it. They're willing to talk about doing it. They're not willing to do it. Even France, I think Macron said, "Oh, your grandchildren." He told them, "Your children are going to have to fight Russia, and some of y'all, we're going to send you to Russia." No, they're not. The French are not going to go to Russia. They're not going to do that. Okay, maybe French mercenaries for money, but not the French people. And the number of people that the UK army can bring to have in uniform, that's a drop in the bucket is what you would need. That's even less than what's remaining in the Ukrainian army. After the Ukrainian army has taken their beating, they've still got more people, more troops in uniform than what the UK has. So these guys are talking. They are talking. They are trash talking, really. And they're also not reflecting the opinions of their populations. All of these guys, the big loudmouths here that that want to threaten France, take Macron, who's the one guy that runs Britain? I can't remember his name.
Starmer.
Starmer, yeah. And Merz in Germany. All of them are facing incredible competition, political competition, domestic complaints, whether it's in their own party. France can't hold its government together. Merz is in real trouble. I mean, the way Merz got elected was he banned in multiple parts of Germany, outright banned the opposition party candidates. Had he not done that, Merz wouldn't be running Germany. So if you think about, in our country, we have a lot of people with the Trump derangement syndrome, like they just can't see straight. It's so upsetting that how is Trump this guy? But half the country is fine with him. Well, not anymore, but at least at this time of his election, he got half the votes, right? Slightly over. That's typical of a president, right? Half vote for one guy, half for the other guy. But these guys in these parliamentary systems of election, or when the parliament itself chooses the president, UK, it's certainly in Germany, popular elections for their presidents or their prime ministers. They have 20%. They're about as popular as Zelensky is in Kiev right now. 20 to 25% popularity. So first off, they don't speak for their countries. Their countries themselves are very upset with them because they've got domestic issues and concerns, a lot of them financial, energy, cost of living. all these things that they blame on these guys. And so these individuals, these mouthpieces of these pro-war NATO governments really are choosing a war over there so that they don't lose their political hide at home. And that's coming. That's coming. And that's the other cost of peace, right? Because it will be good for Ukraine. We hope they can get peace. They can start to rebuild, stop the fighting, stop the killing. That'll be good. But back home, all hell's going to be breaking loose in London and Paris and in Berlin or Bonn, whatever they're, I think where'd they move the capital to in Germany? Did it go to Berlin or is it back in Bonn? I can't remember. But in any case, they have domestic problems. And like all politicians, an external war, an external enemy, an external crisis is a great way to shut up your domestic complainers in the country. So that's what they're doing. And they are writing checks that nobody can cash. They are not sending their troops to Ukraine. And also, it's one thing, we're 3.5 years, almost 4 years into this war. If they were so hyped about it when they saw it was happening, come on, the intel doesn't lie. I've been watching this thing, so is everybody who's paying close attention. Ukraine has been losing from day one. From day one, this has been a meat grinder for Ukraine. They've been on the losing end of it. Well, if they're intelligent and they see this problem, why didn't 3 years ago they send their army into Ukraine? Because they want Ukrainians to die. So do we. Who was it? One of our terrible pro-war senators from South Carolina. Didn't he say, oh, this is the best money we ever spent. We're having Ukrainians die and kill Russians. What more could you ask for? What an inhumane and immoral criminal statement to make publicly, which he made publicly. And then he goes, oh, that was taken out of context. Oh, really? I don't think so. Saw the video. I mean, that's pretty close to what you said. Anyway, they're not, I don't buy that. Now, does that not mean somebody's going to set off something? I think we're in real danger here. At any transition point, that is where the danger is for a false flag. And the Russians fully expect a false flag. In fact, they think that false flags have been happening in Poland with these drone incursions into Polish airspace, Romanian airspace. They're saying, wait a minute, that's not us. I don't know, but they are on alert for false flags. We should be. I don't know.
Let's go to the next question, and maybe it'll be about false flags, or we can come back to that. But Mary Ellen, anybody else in the chat box?
Yeah, there are a few good questions. I'm going to pick one from Henry Lohendorf, who basically states a large segment of the peace movement is aligned with the U.S. State Department and the MIC, which promotes the lie that Russia, i.e. Putin, invaded without provocation. So there are these peace people who call for continuing the war in order to destroy Russia and eliminate Putin. Is it possible? The question is it possible to reach a realistic peace agreement in Ukraine without a unified peace movement? I think I know the answer to that, but I'll let you go.
I can't say, I think the core issues of what made Ukraine vulnerable to our manipulation, vulnerable to NATO manipulation, and what makes them hate Russia, which goes back to some history, but also some things that aren't really historical, things that are kind of developed more recently. But you have to solve the root cause problems to make it a lasting peace. I don't, do you need a peace movement? Well, I would think we have that in Ukraine because everybody's lost somebody and they're sick and tired of it. They don't believe that their politicians have helped them, and don't think Ukrainians don't understand corruption, and that Ukrainians don't understand what it means to live in a country run by oligarchs and corrupt leaders who they know this. So I think the peace movement that's needed really for Ukraine is one inside of Ukraine, and I think they need to choose their future. As far as a larger global peace movement, I mean, everybody's part of that, but we do not have, this idea, oh, we can just get rid of a leader. If Putin goes away, that'll make a permanent peace. No, it won't. First off, we have no understanding of we don't even understand our own country or its politics. How many people here know who's running this country right now today? Nobody knows. But yet we think we kill off one guy or we coup one guy in another country who we know 1% about compared to what we know about our own country, which we don't know anything. It's idiot. It's not right. So I think maybe it's because we're Americans, we like to solve problems. I think what we have to do is step away from the problems, stop creating problems, and get in the habit of stop creating problems, and then see where we can be of helpful to solve problems. But we are creating these problems. With Ukraine, certainly from years and years and years of manipulation, and our own Western, particularly NATO type agenda. And what is the NATO agenda? How many people know the NATO agenda? Right? I mean, are they defending anything? No, they're expanding. And if they got to Russia, where would they want to go from Russia? We're going to take over Russia and we're going to go to China from the Great Wall of China. That's how much we're going to have. They have no end to their ambition of extension, no grounding on how much that would cost, no morality on if that is the right or wrong thing to do. None of that. It's like a machine. It's like a dead-eyed shark. He just does instinct. He doesn't comprehend what he's doing. He just does it because he's a shark. And so, the peace movement, we should have it everywhere, and then we should give it its head, right? Loose rein. Let the Ukrainian peace movement figure out how they want to do things, because I would think they've got more peace-loving people in Ukraine right now than we do.
Yeah, before we go to the next question, I see a hand, but I just want to add to that there are polling organizations in Ukraine, and for the last year and a half, I've seen their surveys, and it's Zelensky's support is tanking, and people are so tired of the war and losing family members. They're saying we want a negotiated settlement, and we're willing to make some concessions of territory and hope probably neutrality, in order to end this carnage.
Yeah.
So that's happening. And I also just wanted to mention we had a wonderful speaker named Professor Marta Havrishko. She's Ukrainian, and she's teaching at Clark University in Massachusetts. And she was our speaker in June. She is courageous because she's receiving death threats from the far right and the neo-Nazi element in Ukraine for speaking out against this war and trying to bring it to a negotiated end. And I think she's really unable to go back. So she's not inside her country, but she knows a lot of people. That's where she came from. She's an expert. Anyway, check her video out. I think it was June she spoke, or anything. Havrishko, Marta Havrishko. Let's go on to our next question. That would be Gray Southan.
Thank you very much. Karen, I really appreciate the depth of your understanding of what the West has done to provoke and maintain this war. How do we get a better understanding of what's happening within the Kremlin and the dynamics there that that would help us understand what sort of settlement would be applicable?
That's actually an easy one, because Putin has been unnaturally consistent in what it is that he or Russia needs from this. And actually, in many ways, it was the same thing they agreed to with the Minsk Accord. It was a political autonomy and and an elimination of harassment of the people in the Donbass, because the Donbass people are, well, two of them have already become Russian, federations or autonomous republics or something under Russia. They voted. Zaporizhia and Kherson areas are not, they haven't done that. They haven't said, oh, we want to join Russia. I don't know what will happen with that, but the Minsk Accords had it, they were protected from being harassed from the capital. So what was going on there is a civil war. And I kind of try to make a comparison to our Civil War in that you have an urban, industrialized type of population on the west, and in the east, where the Donbass is, you have like raw materials, agriculture, more rural, and certainly Russian, much more, anywhere from 70 to 90% Russian-speaking people there. And this was a conflict, a domestic conflict. And so the Minsk Accords were saying, well, let's lay off the harassment. Let's let these people have some political autonomy. And that was agreed to by Ukraine. It was supposed to be guaranteed by Germany and France. And what did the former prime minister or whatever of Germany, the one who used to be a terrorist in the 70s, the lady that ran Germany for so long, she said, oh, that we were just buying time for Russia to arm up. You know, it wasn't really serious. We had no intention of enforcing that. But that's what Putin would have accepted had the Minsk Accords been honored to the letter of that agreement. There would have been no invasion. But it wasn't honored. So I think Putin has said he doesn't want NATO. Okay, that should be easy. It's not, but it should be an easy one. Why would anybody want to be in NATO? NATO should go away. He wants Russian speaking and ethnic Russians in Ukraine to be allowed to worship in the Russian Orthodox Church, to speak Russian without being punished or fined or beaten, to be treated as equal citizens of Ukraine. That's what he wants. What else did he want? He would like to trade with Ukraine as they did before. You know, they ran a lot of Russian gas and oil through the system. There was a lot of trade between the two countries. He would like to see that happen again. He doesn't want to be threatened, militarily threatened with NATO troops or foreign troops or a Ukrainian army bristling with weapons, threatening on that part of his, so close to Moscow, so close to some of the Western Russian cities. So it's very simple. Putin has said it over and over again. He says the same thing all the time. Nobody listens to him. So I think understanding what Putin wants is good. There is one thing you have to consider, though. Many people in Russia, many people don't like Putin, right? I mean, he gets elected with 80%, but I don't know how free those elections are. And many people like him, but many people don't like him. But do you know when this Ukraine war kicked up just like it happens in our country, oh, Putin's popularity went way up. And do you know what the people who were mad at him after the war started were mad at him for? He didn't go in soon enough. He didn't go in hard enough. He didn't simply bomb the living daylights out of Kiev first day. That's what they're mad at him for. We are blessed to have Putin there. They better hope Putin stays around to see this thing to a stable conclusion of peace, because Putin wants that. There are people in Russia that don't. There are people in Russia just as angry as maybe people in our country were after 9/11. You know, what did we want to do after 9/11? Many people who wouldn't even think of it wanted to go kill a bunch of Muslims, right? We were enthusiastic about that. I know so many people. I joined the military to go kill the people that did 9/11. So Putin has been very clear and open and consistent with what he said. So I think we just take him at his word. And then, of course, read the Russian polls. Find out what the Russian people want, because they do have a small voice.
Thank you for all that. Let me just remind everybody, we have 6 minutes left. This has been great. If you have thoughts, questions that we don't even get to because we're going to stop at 8:30, please, I would be glad to respond to them, or anybody on our committee, you know, about the Ukraine war, the situation. Send them. Does Massachusetts Peace Action have just an info? You know, you can go to their website and send a request for information. It'll get to us. So you could do that. And we'd be glad to respond and keep this conversation going. Let's see, was that? Yeah, that was a chat box question. So I see one from Elizabeth Ecker.
Oh, you want me to unmute? Okay.
Elizabeth, please.
That work? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What I don't understand is before they started the regime change and the proxy war, that they still thought Yeltsin was there. They had no idea who Putin really is. Do they don't have the information? Do they still ask on the Condoleezza Rice? Or, I mean, it seems the ignorance seems so overwhelming. How come? I mean, don't they have anybody there that knows what's really going on?
You mean in Washington?
Yes.
They have a few people in Washington that know what's going on, but with this president, and it's the same with other presidents too. I mean, they all want to hear what they want to hear. And Trump doesn't want to hear, well, Trump is worse than others, because Trump actually only wants to hear from certain people. And then those certain people must say, what he wants to hear. So he has a double screen. First off, he doesn't listen to just anybody in his government. He's not listening to Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard, his national security advisor, knows exactly what you're saying and has studied this. And she's actually quite an expert on Russia. She's an intel officer before I think she flew, but she's very well versed. She knows, and she also knows how to read intelligence. She is the top intelligence. She brings she's not his national security advisor. She's the head intelligence officer. So she's looking at all the product that's being put out from all of our 17 or 18 intelligence agencies. But he's not listening to her. He didn't listen to her in the Iran situation. She's working what we could say other projects. Luckily, she's still up there, but he doesn't listen to her. He listens to people who do not read the intelligence. He listens to people who are informed. Really, it's just like high school. You can read a book, you can listen to a teacher, or you can listen to your friends. Well, our government listens to its friends, and some of its friends know nothing. Some of them have completely wrong ideas, and some of them know a little bit. And that's apparently how we make our policy. But the other thing you have to remember, this is about money, okay? This is about a U.S. plan to exploit Europe, to control NATO's purchasing decisions. One of the reasons we wanted this war to go on, we dumped how much bad equipment. I mean, every NATO country and the U.S. as well. What did we do? What can we send to Ukraine? So they went into their storehouses where we don't use this anymore and we can't maintain this anymore. And here's an old bunch of stuff, but half of them wrecked, so we don't even have a squadron. Let's send that to them. And then we didn't care what happened. A lot of the stuff was shot up when the first day it hit the road, or shot up on the, parked on the tarmac, sold. A lot of it was corruption. We got some old, probably sent them 25-year-old meals ready to eat. They sold those. So among other things, I mean, small arms, we saw lots of weapons that were filtered all over the world, people who track that could see coming from the U.S. and into Ukraine and then out to the rest of the world. So that was a disposal operation couched in proxy war on Russia. Because once you run out of stuff, what do all those governments do? What do their militaries do? They get, hey, we're out, man. We've got to re-up this and that. No, by the way, we want new stuff now. We want new tech stuff. It's going to cost a lot of money. You need to definitely prioritize your military sector. And what did NATO do? What was Trump's big thing? You're going to have to go up to 5%, and I'm going to make you do it. And then we hope you buy American. It's not just hope with Trump. It's like you're going to buy American products. You're going to take the F-35. You're going to take all these things. This is about military industrial complex churn. And Ukraine is just the happy accident where we can play this out. That's a big part of it.
Thank you. We are at time, and I want everybody just to give me a little bit of waving hands to honor our speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. Nobody will doubt your passion and conviction. You've expressed it beautifully. I feel like it could go on for another 2 hours, but
Probably.
we can't. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Again, get in touch with Massachusetts Peace Action. Sign up for newsletter membership if you want. If you want to ask questions of us, get involved in the Ukraine peace campaign. We would love to hear from you. Thanks. Have a good evening, everybody.